Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at meta classes, so classes that are perceived to be the best Season 3 World of Warcraft Shadowlands expansion. And in this video we'll be talking about tanks, ranged DPS, melee DPS, healers, and classes that are perceived to be the best in order to get some of the highest keys in the world. Now, a big disclaimer before I do any of these videos: I consider keys 26 and upwards to be type of keys where you really start to build a meta classes or a meta composition based on which key, which affix. So if you're not doing the highest keys in the world, I really stress this. Stick with the class that you enjoy the most, because that's going to be the best value of your subscription. Unless you really want to push rank 1 keys and you start to see the difference between some of the meta classes and their performance in Mythic Plus. So right now you're probably seeing multiple screens, and I want to do a couple of things in this video. So first of all, on your right you see the tier list for tanks, and this is using Subcreation Mythic Plus website. This website uses data based on, and you can see it here, based on 50,000, over 50,000 runs. This is in Season 3, ranging from 16 to 31 keys. So this uses real player information and creates an unbiased tier list. Now, these tier lists can be wrong in certain extent, because a lot of the time the community, for example, they see a 31 key being done with a Blood Decay. And then all of a sudden people who do 16, 17 and 18 keys start to think that they need to play a Blood Decay, and they stop playing other classes, and all of a sudden Protection Warriors all the way to the C tier. And it might not be that bad to play a Protection Warrior, but because of the community perception, the snowball effect, this is very evident for Mistweaver, which I'll talk about later on, and all of a sudden the class seems to be unplayable, which is not true. And then I'm going to be using rated.io information, which is again real player information. I'm going to be looking at keys 25 and up, and we're going to see which specs, which classes are really popular. We're going to be determining, again, we're going to use this real play information in terms of determining tanks, healers, melee DPS, ranged DPS, and then after all of that, I'm going to be making a list, my own personal list of classes, as you can see in the bottom left corner of your screen. Classes that I consider to be S tier, classes that I might consider to be A tier. This is not going to be in order. It's not going to be the perfect representation of what is meta, but this is going to be my opinions of which classes are used a lot based on real play information and my personal opinions. And we're gonna start off with a tank tier list for Season 3 Shadowlands Mythic Plus Performance. And again, the subcreation data based on all the keys ranging in this Season 3. Blood Decay is S tier. If you look at rated.io, you can see Blood Decay is the most popular tank in 25 and up keys. There is a good reason for that. Without a doubt, Blood Decay is an absolute S tier class right now. It is probably going to be used in some of the highest keys in the world. Now, what's happening? Blood Decays were actually nerfed a couple of weeks ago. Blizzard was going to nerf them even further, but they kind of reverted the change. And even after the nerf, Blood Decays are still extremely strong. So first of all, huge amount of personal responsibility if you're playing a Blood Decay. If you're playing a Blood Decay, you're probably the top healer in the group, depending on which affix. So all of a sudden, you can do pulls that a lot of other tanks cannot do because of your tier set, because of your uptime for Dancing Rune Weapon and things like that. So Blood Decay, really high self-sustain. To some extent, as a healer, you don't have to pay too much attention to Blood Decay, which means that as a healer, you can focus on other party members or even focus on DPS. Now, there are times when a Blood Decay might drop Dancing Rune Weapon, or they might not have a lot of runic power and they're low HP. So if you're playing Resto Shaman, you might drop a Spirit Link. If you're playing Priest, you might drop a GA or something like that. So there are ways to help out your Blood Decay tank, but generally speaking, you can just let them be. Let them do their thing, and if you play with a really good Blood Decay, they're providing good damage, good self-sustain, they can do pulls that a lot of other tanks cannot do, and overall, S tier tank. Now in terms of other tanks, and again, Subcreation places a lot of tanks in A tier, and I actually do agree with this. I think the tank balance outside of Blood Decay is actually pretty decent. You can play a Guardian Druid, you can play a Prot Warrior and a lot of high-end keys. Again, the community perception is not great for them, but you can still achieve good numbers. I do think that based on rated.io information, based on what I've seen, Brewmasters are climbing as the second best tank in really high-end Mythic Plus content. So I would place, in my opinion, Brewmaster in A tier. I could place Vengeance Demon Hunter, I could place Prot Paladin here, but I'm going to be extremely harsh in terms of ranking these classes. I think Brewmaster is kind of stepping into that A tier, S tier role. Maybe not S tier completely, but you gotta look at the tier set bonus, especially 4 set bonus. So much self-sustain, so much additional damage, and all of a sudden you do have that stagger mechanic that is iconic to a Brewmaster, which means that spiking really hard doesn't really happen. It can happen if you're doing some insane pulls, but Generally speaking, things like Restoration Druid HOTS work really well with Stagger, with Brewmaster and things like that. Brewmaster is extremely mobile, you're providing 5% physical damage debuff because you're a monk. And I do think Brewmasters are really fun to play because of the whole Stagger and the tier set, and I think they're a worthy A tier tank right now. Now, I could really put Vengeance Demon Hunter here as well, because Vengeance Demon Hunter, there is a lot of reasons to play Vengeance. The main reason, the 5% Chaos brand buff that you get for magic damage. And I'll talk about the DPS classes that can benefit a lot from it, but if you're playing with a Destruction Warlock and a Survival Hunter, which you probably will be, 5% magic debuff is pretty significant addition to the overall group's DPS. Now, I do think you have to be a really good Vengeance Demon Hunter to make it work, but I'm going to be very harsh, like I mentioned. I'm not going to put them in A tier, I'm not going to put Protection Paladin in A tier either. I'm just going to go with Blood Decay and Brewmaster right now. Protection Paladin, infinite amount of interrupts with Avenger's Shield. There's a lot of self-sustain or self-healing to the group. You're almost a tank, a healer, and a DPS at the same time as the Prot Paladin. Guardian Druid, again, they have kind of fallen off because the tier set was really nerfed by Blizzard, which I don't know whether it made sense or not, but Guardian Druid, AoE DPS is absolutely insane. The only problem is that you're playing for Incarn. Incarn is a 3-minute cooldown. You're basically unkillable during those windows, but outside of Incarnation, you have to be very, very careful. And then you have Protection Warrior, which honestly, I've not played with enough Protection Warriors to make my decision about this. I do think there is a good reason to play a Prot Warrior if you really enjoy it, but I feel a lot of people have swapped away from Prot Warrior to play something like a Blood Decay, and there is a severe lack of Prot Warriors, and this is going to be my general list of tanks, and we're going to move on to healers. And now in terms of healers, again, we're looking at sub-creation, auto-generate data, and this is for all of the runs for Season 3. Again, you can see that there is definitely certain healers that are emerging as being the best, and I agree with this. I think Holy Priest and Resto Shaman are probably considered, or should be considered, S tier right now because of what they provide. So straight away, I'm going to place Holy Priest as S tier. I probably would place Holy Priest as being a better healer than Resto Shaman, and I'll talk about why that is. So first of all, if we look at rated.io information for healers, you can see that there's actually more Resto Shamans playing the game than Holy Priests in really high-end 25 plus keys, and it actually makes sense. The reason why I said Holy Priest would be better is because you're basically trading away PI or Power Infusion, which Holy Priest provides, or Priests provide in general, for an interrupt / AoE stun that Resto Shaman has. So in pug situations, if you're pugging high-end keys, and there's a lot of pugs out there for 25, 26 keys, if you're pugging keys, I actually consider Resto Shaman to be a better option because you might not be joining Discord servers, you might not have an interrupt kind of rotation, so Resto Shaman with an interrupt can help out or kind of fix players' mistakes. Spirit Link is still a really strong cooldown when things go wrong. So I think Resto Shaman for pugging is a really good option, but if you have an organized group, and this is very, very evident in MDI type of content, if you have an organized group that has a Discord, they're communicating, they have an interrupt rotation, PI or Power Infusion is going to be an insane asset to the overall DPS group because you have an insane PI target through Destruction Warlock, which we'll talk about in the Ranged DPS section. So this is why I say if you're playing an organized group, Holy Priest is probably going to be a better option. If you're pugging a lot of content, Resto Shaman is going to be a better option. Both of these healers provide insane amount of healing. Resto Shaman provides a lot of healing with 4-set bonus. You need the 4-set bonus in my opinion. They provide an insane amount of damage again. Holy Priest with Kyrian, Boon of the Ascended. You do go into melee, you do use your Novas, your Blasts and things like that, and you kind of have to focus on it, but the damage that you're going to provide is going to be insane, and that's not counting the PI that you're giving out to your Destruction Warlock. And then, again, Resto Shaman's damage comes from legendaries because you can run Deep Tremor Stone legendary, which provides Earthquake to your Earth Elemental, which can actually be an amazing thing or something that you really, really hate, especially on fortified weeks where you might be holding onto your Earth Elemental because you know if you use your Earth Elemental on a high 27 fortified week, your Earth Elemental just has to look at the mob and it's going to instantly die. So there is, how do I say, there's negatives and positives with both of these classes, but the way that I would consider them, Holy Priest for an organized group because PI is really, really strong. Resto Shaman for a pug group or a group that tends to let's say, fail a bit more with interrupts. Maybe they need an AoE stun and things like that. And these healers right now are extremely strong in Mythic Plus. I actually could easily include Holy Paladin, and I could easily include Rest of Jude in A tier, but I'm going to be, again, very harsh about the ranking here. I do think there is 2 healers that are really strong right now, and they're both in S tier. And I think both of these healers are going to be preferred by a lot of Mythic Plus pushing groups, but there's no reason why I can't play Holy Paladin or Resto Druid, and I actually think that the ranking here of Mistweaver and Discipline Priest is a little bit iffy. It's a snowball effect, because everyone sees Holy Priest, everyone sees Resto Shamans in really high-end keys. If you're a Mistweaver, you probably have re-rolled from Mistweaver if you're trying to do these high Mythic Plus keys. Even though I think Mistweaver is not that bad, it lacks damage, but the healing that Mistweaver provides is pretty strong. The utility that Mistweaver has is pretty strong. So the only thing that brings Mistweavers down is their overall damage, which for majority of people out there and people who are watching this video, if you don't care about healer damage, Mistweaver is an excellent choice for a healer in Mythic Plus content. So now let's go to Melee DPS, and this is again sub-creation data. There is a king spec in Melee DPS, and there's a king spec in Ranged DPS, and we'll talk about this when we get to Ranged DPS, but without a doubt, and again, sub-creation data is not really, again, it doesn't show the clear picture here, but Survival Hunter is an absolute S tier Melee DPS or DPS class in game right now for Mythic Plus content. Without a doubt, Survival Hunter is going to have an S tier spot. If we go to rated.io information for Mythic Plus or Melee DPS for 25 and up keys, Survival Hunter, absolutely, like every group is going to have Survival Hunter both in tyrannical and fortified keys. It is very, very strong. There is a lot of debate about whether the class is fun to play or not, because if you play Survival Hunter for a very long time, the power for them in Mythic Plus comes from the tier set, especially they're considered the Bomb King. So all of a sudden, there is a lot of changes in gameplay when you get your force set or when you get your tier set bonus, and all of a sudden you might actually even leave out some of the class mechanics that you used to use all of the time. You might actually ignore them because the tier set changes your gameplay in such a way that you're playing for your bombs. And there is a lot of RNG elements for playing Survival Hunter, so if you don't like RNG or randomness to your DPS, you might not want to play Survival Hunter. But regardless, Survival Hunter, absolutely S tier Melee DPS. It is very strong in terms of the damage it provides. The tier set bonus is something that made them this strong. It is funny to think about the fact that you can see here Feral Druid. In PTO from 9.2, Feral Druid tier set was insanely overpowered, and they were looking to be S tier, A tier type of Melee DPS because of the tier set. But in 9.2 PTO, they nerfed Feral Druids, but they didn't touch Survival Hunters. And that was the difference between having Survival Hunter in S tier because of the tier set bonus and having Feral Druid all the way in the bottom because of that one change. So this is just to showcase how quickly the meta can actually change if you're playing these flavor of the month DPS classes. Now in terms of other Melee DPS classes, again you can see here Sub Rogue here, and if you look at rated.io information, Sub Rogue is actually quite popular to play. I actually don't think Sub Rogue is all that amazing. How do I say it? You most likely will have a Survival Hunter in your group, and then you most likely will have a Destruction Warlock in your group, and then the tertiary spot or the third spot is going to be very, very open. I do think Sub Rogue fills in a good niche, but first of all, in my opinion, the whole rogue utility has fallen a little bit because Shadow Concealment was such a big deal in previous tiers. Now Shadow Concealment has a lot less value because you have WoW from the affix. And on top of that, sub-rogue damage, a lot of the times you will be doing a lot of the utility stuff. A lot of the times you'll be doing a lot of priority damage. Let's say, for example, you're doing Halls of Atonement Key and you're about to do the Shard pull, and everyone's going to be doing AoE damage, but the Shard has so much more HP. You need priority damage on the Shard, you need ethical DPS on the Shard, and a sub-rogue might actually be the class that does that. A sub-rogue will provide a lot of stuns, a lot of stops that are needed to prevent players from getting one-shot, for example, in keys like Mist of Tierna's Side. As a rogue, you're kind of like a utility player that provides or allows your other DPS classes like Destruction Warlocks and Survival Hunters to do their thing, and you're there to help the party in other ways, which is not a bad thing. But if you're looking for big DPS numbers, you're not going to get it from rogue unless you're trying to really pad with things like Black Powder and stuff like that. I actually would definitely consider a Windwalker to be another option that's actually probably better than a sub-rogue right now. Marginally better. I think there is an extreme shortage of Windwalker monks right now because a lot of people swapped away from Windwalker. Windwalker was actually buffed a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden Windwalkers are kind of rising in popularity. You can see here, based on rated.io information, there is a lot of rogues, there is a lot of Windwalkers emerging in the last couple of weeks, and even doing like some of the insanely high keys. Now, Windwalker damage is higher than what a rogue provides. Windwalker AoE is pretty strong, and Windwalker provides a lot of utility. Believe it or not, having things like AoE stops and paralyze, having a CC that is not restricted by the type of the mob, is really, really good in a lot of high-end Mythic Plus keys. So there is a lot of things that Windwalker provides, and I think Windwalker is marginally better than a rogue, but there is less Windwalkers out there than rogues. So this is why I think there is a little bit of a skewed data right now. But if you are looking for a good melee DPS and you hate Survival Hunter and you hate rogue, I definitely think Windwalker is right up there. Now, it could absolutely include things like Havoc DH or Fury Warrior in this list, but I'm going to be, again, extremely harsh in terms of ranking this. If you look at rated.io information, there is a decent amount of Havoc Demon Hunters, there is a decent amount of Fury Warriors out there, but I do think that they're not as ingrained in the meta as, again, Survival Hunter, Destruction Warlock, but I do think Havoc Demon Hunter, or I talked about Vengeance Demon Hunter even in the tank section, the fact that they provide 5% magic debuff is a very significant portion of the overall group's DPS. And I think you could have a Havoc Demon Hunter in there just purely because of that buff. They don't have bad damage, they do provide decent damage, but that debuff is a really, really significant kind of portion of their class. But I'm not going to include them. And now we're going to move on to Ranged DPS. And honestly, the chat right here from Subcreation is not doing the right justice here. Destruction Warlock is most likely the best class in the game by a substantial margin when it comes to Mythic Plus content, especially fortified keys. They're still good in tyrannical keys, but in fortified keys, if I was to rank Destruction Warlock is obviously going to be STA. I'm not ranking these by the power, but if I was, I probably would put Destruction Warlock by probably S+++ type of deal. I might put Survival Hunter here. These three classes, in my opinion, are extremely ingrained in Mythic Plus right now. You will have these three classes in every single high-end Mythic Plus push group. To some extent, if you're doing a fortified key, you might actually have double Destruction Warlock because they're that good. Now, why is Destruction Warlock so good? If you look at some of the rated.io information for range classes, you can see Warlocks are just by a mile the top ranged, not ranged, DPS class. The AoE damage that you provide as a Destruction Warlock is unmatched. Now, first of all, you have your tier set bonus, you have your Wilfred's Legendary, you have Infernal, you have Rain of Fire, you have Rain of Chaos Talents, and all of those things synergize for a class, or to make a class that is basically Rain of Fire spam in AoE situations. You place multiple Rain of Fires. The mobs, if the mobs are allowed to stay in that position, if it's not like a Sanguine week, there is not a single class out there that's going to get even close to the AoE damage that you can do as a Destruction Warlock. I talked about the fact that Holy Priest is also kind of emerging as a meta in terms of healers because he has PI. So if you provide, or if you play Holy Priest and you provide PI to your Destruction Warlock, it's not uncommon to do or see on fortified weeks Destruction Warlock doing 30k plus overall damage, and the next best DPS is like 20k. Destruction Warlock, or a good Destruction Warlock that's being fed PI, so power infusions throughout the dungeon on the fortified week, is probably the single best person who's going to carry your group. Now, on top of that, not only you have the best AoE damage, you also have a good single target damage. It might not be the best in the game out there, it's very, very competitive, but you also extremely tanky. You have good defensives. You have a lot of utility through your pets. Now, you can use Fell Hunter, you're going to get an interrupt, which is fine. The interrupt is off GCD because it's your pet, so that's also a nice thing. You also have Purge with Fell Hunter, and then on certain, let's say, tyrannical bosses like Spires of Ascension last boss, like some of the bosses in TOP, you can get your Imp pet out. An Imp can dispel magic debuffs, and it's going to make some of the hardest bosses on tyrannical weeks, like I talked about, Spires of Ascension, TOP, be completely simplified because you have a magic dispel and your healer is going to tank you so much. So there are multiple reasons why Destruction Warlock is the best class in the game right now when it comes to Mythic Plus and especially fortified weeks. First of all, you have unmatched AoE, really strong defensives and survivability, has a lot of utility through pets, but to some extent you can say that Warlocks or Destruction Warlocks in general have mobility issues. I'm not saying you don't have tools to deal with mobility, but you have to deal with them preemptively. You have your teleports or gateways, you have your demonic circle. Demonic circle is basically transcendence if you're playing a monk, but there is a lot of tools that you can use, but you need to know when to use them, or you need to use them before the actual movement happens. But at the end of the day, they do have a pretty simplistic rotation when it comes to especially fortified weeks where you're just spamming Rain of Fire and trying to generate your soul shards. In terms of other ranged DPS classes, Fire and Frost, you can see here, is emerging. You can see here from Rated.io, there is a certain amount of mages in high-end Mythic Plus keys. It's not even close. Like, there is no comparison here. You don't need to have a mage in your party, but I will put Fire and Frost as A tier just because there is not a lot of ranged DPS classes that are strong outside of a Destruction Warlock. So you can't play a Frost Mage, especially in fortified weeks where you're going to provide a consistent slow, especially if you're playing with a tank that needs to kite a lot more, like something like Avengers Demon Hunter to some extent. Maybe a Frost Mage is going to be really nice. And then Fire is, again, Fire does a lot of damage through combustion windows. But do I consider a mage to be a mandatory part of your team? No. These are the three classes that are mandatory in a high-end Mythic Plus pushing group. And then you have another spot, one DPS spot, where you're probably going to fill it up with these classes right here, most likely. And you can take your pick on which class you need. Now, I did put a Brewmaster in terms of tank spots because I do think Brewmaster can replace a Blood Decay. I do think, again, I placed two healers here, Holy Priest and Resto Shaman. I could have placed Resto Druid here, I could have placed Holy Paladin here as well, but I'm being extremely harsh in terms of what classes are emerging and what classes are really, really strong at high-end content. Now, this is the summary of the video. I already talked about the summary. I want to know about your opinions. How is the balance in Mythic Plus? Do you like the fact that you have these clear S plus classes right now that are really strong? A lot of people might say, like, I hate the fact that the Destruction Warlock is so much better than, say, like an Elemental Shaman or any of these classes mentioned here. How can a Destruction Warlock do so much more damage? Keep in mind, guys, this is Season 3. In Season 2, Season 1, you had outlier classes in terms of Frost Mages be absolutely insane. You had Rogues being really strong. You had Balance Druid being really strong early in Shadowlands. So Blizzard has historically been fine with having outlier classes in Mythic Plus. But is that a good thing? Is it good to have certain classes that are going to dominate for like 6 months, and then let's say Season 4 rolls out? I'm expecting that there's not going to be any class balancing happening even when patch 9.25 comes out. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of things happening. But with Season 4, there is possibly going to be some class balances. Or do you want class nerfs and class buffs to happen in Season 4? Do you want seasons to be separated by certain classes? Like, for example, Season 1 is dominated by this class, Season 2 is dominated by another class. This is something that is definitely a good discussion topic, because right now, historically speaking, Blizzard does have outlier classes based on patches, and that's how they've done it for a really long time. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Let me know, guys. And thank you for watching this video again. There is multiple classes that I could have included in the A tier. I'm being very, very strict in terms of what I'm including. And I do think that if you're not pushing highest keys in the world, please don't be forced to play these classes if you're doing 22 keys. You can absolutely do 25 keys with any kind of combination. You can really have a good time. But if you're doing really high keys, and if you have a Destruction Warlock, maybe 2 Destruction Warlocks, Survival Hunter, these are your cheat code classes. They will make a lot of content easier. And that's not my personal opinion. That's a fact for Season 3. Let me know, and I'll see you in my next